Hello and welcome to the Awareness Factory, the place where we look critically at what is going on in the world right now. What do those people that I show here have in common? One is the Archbishop Carlo Vigano, who is Archbishop of Ulpiana and former Apostolic Nuncio to the United States of America. The other one is Professor Michael Lovett, Nobel Prize winner, biophysicist, and a professor of structural biology. The other three here are Dr. Martin Kulldorff, Dr. Sunetra Gupta, and Dr. J. Bhattacharya, all of them top epidemiologists. And the one on the right is Lord Jonathan Sumption, former British Supreme Court Justice. So what do all of these people have in common? Well, some might say they are all completely crazy and nutcases conspiracy theorists because all of them have spoken out on the current situation from different points of views. And stay until the end, some of their statements are real bombshells. Before we dive right in, if you enjoy this type of content, please support our work by liking, sharing and subscribing, and also do not forget to hit the notification button. It really helps us out a lot. And yes, you can also find us at BitChute and Library. I'm gonna post the links in the description box below because in those times, unfortunately, you never know how long you can survive here on YouTube. So you can also find us on non-censored platforms. All right, without further ado then, let's look at what those people have to say about government policies and the craziness that is going on in the world right now from legal point of view, from a medical point of view, etc., etc. And I'm gonna start with Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, who wrote an open letter to the President of the US, Donald J. Trump, on October the 25th, 2020. I'm going to link the whole letter in the description box below. It's a real bombshell if you ask me what he writes, and I'm not going to read you here the whole letter, but there's some interesting parts of it. So he starts off by saying, Mr. President, allow me to address you at this hour in which the fate of the whole world is being threatened by a global conspiracy against God and humanity. I write to you as an archbishop, as a successor of the apostles, as the former apostolic nuncio to the United States of America. I am writing to you in the midst of the silence of both civil and religious authorities. May you accept these words of mine as the quote-unquote voice of one crying out in the desert. Daily, we sense the attacks multiplying of those who want to destroy the very basis of society. The natural family, respect for human life, love of country, freedom of education and business. We see heads of nations and religious leaders pandering to the suicide of Western culture and its Christian soul, while the fundamental rights of citizens and believers are denied in the name of a health emergency that is revealing itself more and more fully as instrumental to the establishment of an inhuman, faceless tyranny. Wow, quite strong words, I would say. But it gets better. He goes on to say the following. A global plan called the Great Reset is underway. Its architect is a global elite that wants to subdue all of humanity, imposing coercive measures with which to drastically limit individual freedoms and those of entire populations. Behind the world leaders, who are the accomplices and executors of this infernal project, there are unscrupulous characters who finance the World Economic Forum and Event 201, promoting their agenda. This guy has done his research. The purpose of the Great Reset is the imposition of a health dictatorship, aiming at the imposition of liberticidal measures hidden behind tempting promises of ensuring a universal income and cancelling individual debt. The price of these concessions from the International Monetary Fund will be the renunciation of private property and adherence to a program of vaccination against COVID-19 and COVID-21 promoted by Bill Gates with the collaboration of the main pharmaceutical groups. Beyond the enormous economic interests that motivate the promoters of this Great Reset, the imposition of the vaccination will be accompanied by the requirement of a health passport and a digital ID with the consequent contact tracing of the population of the entire world. Those who do not accept these measures will be confined in detention camps or placed under house arrest, and all their assets will be confiscated. Mr. President, I imagine that you are already aware that in some countries the Great Reset will be activated between the end of this year and the first trimester of 2021. For this purpose, further lockdowns are planned, which will be officially justified by a supposed second and third wave of the pandemic. Well, isn't he right? It's already going in this direction. Many countries have started locking down again. He goes on to say, you are well aware of the means that have been deployed to sow panic and legitimize draconian limitations on individual liberties, artfully provoking a worldwide economic crisis. In the intentions of its architects, this crisis will serve to make the recourse of nations to the Great Reset irreversible, thereby giving the final blow to a world whose existence and very memory they want to completely cancel. Until a few months ago, it was easy to smear as conspiracy theorists those who denounced these terrible plans, which we now see being carried out down to the smallest detail. How right he is. No one, up until last February, would ever have thought that in all of our cities, citizens would be arrested simply for wanting to walk down the street, to breathe, to want to keep their businesses open, to want to go to church on Sunday. And while the politicians are barricaded inside their palaces, promulgating decrees like Persian satraps, businesses are failing, shops are closing, and people are prevented from living, traveling, working, and praying. The Archbishop also talks about the disastrous psychological consequences of these measures. He says the disastrous psychological consequences of this operation are already being seen, beginning with the suicides of desperate entrepreneurs and of our children, segregated from friends and classmates, told to follow their classes while sitting at home alone in front of a computer. And we've looked in previous presentations at the suicide rates going up by 50% depending on which study you look at and which age group. So yeah, he's spot on, I would say. And yet he also sees reason for hope. In the midst of this bleak picture, this apparently unstoppable advance of the invisible enemy, an element of hope emerges. The adversary does not know how to love. And it does not understand that it is not enough to assure universal income or cancel mortgages in order to subjugate the masses and convince them to be branded like cattle. This people, which for too long has endured the abuses of a hateful and tyrannical power, is rediscovering that it has a soul. It is understanding that it is not willing to exchange its freedom for the homogenization and cancellation of its identity. It is beginning to understand the value of familial and social ties, of the bonds of faith and culture that unite honest people. This Great Reset is destined to fail because those who planned it do not understand that there are still people ready to take to the streets to defend their rights, to protect their loved ones, to give a future to their children and grandchildren. The leveling inhumanity of the globalist project will shatter miserably in the face of the firm and courageous opposition of the children of light. And I really do hope that he is right on this. We see already signs of people having enough of these measures. The big demonstrations have continued to go on in almost all of the big European cities, especially in Germany, where last weekend again tens of thousands were on the streets protesting the lockdown measures. In Greece, in Israel, all over the world, the people are fighting for their rights, and I think he's right. This is an element of hope. So we had a courageous religious leader and what he thinks about this. And we also have Lord Jonathan Sumption, former British Supreme Court Justice for many years. He has spoken out repeatedly against what is going on in the UK specifically, of course, in his case, but it's applicable to many other countries, unfortunately. And again, a couple of weeks ago, he had the following to say in an article from The Guardian. The government has discovered the power of public fear to let it get its way and has deliberately stoked fear over corona while behaving like an authoritarian regime relying on police state tactics. He condemned the way that, quote, the British state exercised coercive powers over its citizens on a scale never previously attempted. He also went on to say the ease with which people could be terrorized into surrendering their basic freedoms, which are fundamental to our existence, came as a shock to me in March 2020. And he's not the only former judge recently to lament the loss of effective parliamentary scrutiny of emergency COVID powers. Last month, Lady Hale, former president of the Supreme Court, alleged that MPs or members of parliament in the UK and peers had surrendered their role during this pandemic. Lord Sumption said also that the emergency measures were, quote, the most significant interference with personal freedom in the history of our country. And he went on to say that I do not doubt the seriousness of the pandemic, or epidemic actually, but I believe that history will look back on the measures taken to contain it as a monument of collective hysteria and governmental folly. The government's behavior, Sumption told his audience, was characterized by a, quote, cavalier disregard for the limits of their legal powers, end quote. Another personality who has been very outspoken on what is going on right now, from the very beginning actually, is Nobel Prize winner Professor Michael Lovett. He said in a recent statement or an interview, I think we've really screwed up. We've left your generation with a real mess in order to save a relatively small number of very old people. Lovett's position throughout this situation has been that the virus that shall not be named will follow the same course as other flu-like pandemics. His observation is a simple one, that in outbreak after outbreak, a similar mathematical pattern is observable regardless of government interventions. And when we look at the numbers and at the statistics, which we've done in previous presentations, we see that he has been proven correct. When we compare countries without lockdowns and mask mandates like Sweden or Japan with the ones who implemented all of these measures, we see that the outcome was not worse for those countries who protected the vulnerable and nothing let the normal general public continue on with their normal lives. The point he makes is very interesting and correct in my opinion. The unmitigated scenarios modeled by, among others, the Imperial College, and which tilted governments across the world into drastic action, relied on a presumption of continued exponential growth. that with a consistent R number, so replication number of significantly above 1 and a consistent death rate, very quickly the majority of the population would be infected and huge numbers of deaths would be recorded. But his point was from the beginning that that hasn't actually happened anywhere in previous situations, and as we see now from the data, it also hasn't happened now, even in countries that have been relatively lax in their responses, as mentioned. And last but not least, not even a month ago, there was the Great Barrington Declaration that came out, signed and authored by Dr. Martin Kulldorff, professor of medicine at Howard University, a biostatistician and epidemiologist with expertise in detecting and monitoring infectious disease outbreaks and vaccine safety evaluations. Dr. Sunetra Gupta, professor at Oxford University, also a top epidemiologist with expertise in immunology, vaccine development and mathematical modeling of infectious diseases. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, professor at Stanford University Medical School, a physician also top epidemiologist, health economist and public health policy expert who is focusing on infectious diseases and vulnerable populations. And those authors and the other co-signers of this declaration have, quote, grave concerns about the damaging physical and mental health impacts of the prevailing virus policies. Current lockdown policies, according to them, are producing devastating effects on short and long-term public health. And the measures will lead to greater excess mortality in years to come, with the working class and younger members of society carrying the heaviest burden. Keeping these measures in place until a vaccine is available will cause irreparable damage, with the underprivileged disproportionately harmed. And therefore, they say that the most compassionate approach that balances the risk and benefits of reaching herd immunity is to allow those who are at minimal risk of death to live their lives normally, to build up immunity to the virus through natural infection, while at the same time better protecting those who are at highest risk. And they call this focused protection. Those who are not vulnerable should immediately be allowed to resume life as normal. And the Great Barrington Declaration has been signed by over 620,000 concerned citizens, but also almost 12,000 medical and public health scientists and almost 35,000 medical practitioners. I'm gonna also post a link to the Great Barrington Declaration in the description box below for you, so you can also sign it. I think it's a great initiative by 3 top epidemiologists from the most famous universities in the US. And again, the data shows us that they are completely right with their assessment, in my humble opinion, of course. With all that being said, I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. If you did so, support our work by liking, sharing and subscribing. Also, do not forget to hit the notification button. You can also follow us, as I said already, over at BitChute and Library. And always remember, stay aware and think critically for yourself.